Good evening, everyone. It's your girl, Marcy Thomas, and I am so glad to be back with you again for another episode of the BGC Book Club. So come on in the room and let's get ready to have a really wonderful conversation with a sister who has a book that's coming out tomorrow, actually. So I am really excited for us to be able to get a heads up and a first look at this beautiful book that I've had a chance to read. I've already told her that I ran through it and really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to have this conversation. So I am coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, by way of Cleveland, Ohio, and a bunch of other places in between. So if you don't mind letting us know where you're joining us from, that would be great, just so we can know who all is here and who is represented. And if this is your first time or your 100th time, so we can know again who's in the room. And just so you know, at the top, if you have any questions that you want to ask along the way, this is a collective conversation. So please feel free to ask your questions. So tonight I'm especially pleased to have with us Nancy Johnson, who is the author of People of Means, which will be hitting the bookshelves tomorrow, unless you've already pre-ordered, but it will definitely be on the bookshelves tomorrow. So Nancy is a native of Chicago's South Side and the author also of The Kindest Lie. And she has worked for more than a decade as an Emmy-nominated, award-winning journalist at CBS and ABC affiliates and markets nationwide. Her debut novel, which was The Kindest Lie, was reviewed by the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Los Angeles Times. Her work has been published in Real Simple and the Oprah magazine, and has received support from the Hurston Wright Foundation, Tin House, and Cambilio Fiction. She is a graduate of Northwestern University and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She lives in her hometown of downtown Chicago, and outside of writing, she leads corporate and internal communications for a large healthcare nonprofit. So this is a very busy lady. So I count it an honor to have her with us for this conversation. So without any further delay, let's welcome Nancy Johnson to the BGC Book Club. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you, Marcy. It's so good to be with you and to be with everybody. I'm excited.
Oh, yes. So am I, because this is a beautiful book. First of all, just looking at it, it's beautiful just to look at the beautiful colors. So you see, I tried to match it up a little bit.
You really did. I love that. Yeah. I don't think I even knew that. Nice.
But yes, People of Means is a wonderful book. And of course, it is your second novel. So I know every time an author puts a book baby out into the world, there are a whole lot of feelings and thoughts surrounding that. So how are you feeling on the eve of Pub Day?
I'm nervous, but I'm also excited. You know, I mean, there's so many moving parts that sometimes you don't have time to really take it all in. I've gotten so many messages from other authors saying, take some time to enjoy the moment and to really soak it all in. But it can be so hard to do because I have so much that's going on. Like I have some books, some copies for sweepstakes and giveaways that my publisher has sent. So I've been signing those, trying to get those off to UPS, and went today to get, nails done and all that. And, I'm going to have a book cake at my launch event tomorrow. So one of those cakes where the icing is in the, design of the cover of the book. And so I'm thinking, okay, I got to remember to go pick up the cake for the event, right? And there's just so much to do. And then tonight after we finish here, I'm going to be emailing some people I know who, mainly other authors, giving them information, like a synopsis of what the book's about, giving them some assets, some graphics to promote my book tomorrow. So those kinds of things. It takes a village. And so we really rely on each other to promote each other's books and social media. So there's always something to do, but I'm excited.
Yes, and I'm excited for people to get their hands on it because as you all saw, I already have my copy. I've already had a chance to devour this book and just really get into the story. So, well, first, I just want y'all to look at that because this is going to give us a little bit about what this story is about. You see, like, there's one sister over here that, looking kind of old school. And then this looks like, this is also old school, like with the big earrings.
Yes,
and all of that. So that gives us a little hint of what this story is about. So, of course, as we're introducing this to the world now, just give us a little synopsis of what People of Means is about.
Sure. People of Means is a story of an upper middle class Black mother and daughter, the two of them each coming of age at different moments of social or racial reckoning in America. The mother, Freda, is the one that's a little more the old school side of the cover. She's coming of age as a student at Fisk University, a historically Black university in Nashville, during the time of the sit-ins in the late 50s, early 60s. And then we also follow the story of her daughter, Tulip, 30 years later. And she is a young public relations professional in Chicago in 1992 at the time of the acquittal of the 4 officers who were acquitted of beating Rodney King. So 2 monumental times in our nation's history. And you've got these 2 young Black women who are thrust into this, and they're having to make some really difficult decisions and choices about whether or not they're going to get involved in any kind of activism or resistance. And if they get involved, how are they going to do so?
Yes, and that's a real great synopsis of what it is about. And it really did make me think about, and it's going to cause you all, the readers, to think about what does it mean for a person who gets involved in the movement or chooses not to, because it's always a choice. And, I've heard people say that, like, for example, nowadays, everybody wants to celebrate King holiday and talk about what a great man he was, and, and the work that he did for the civil rights movement and all of that. But at the time that he was actually doing it, like in this book, you would see people who might not necessarily want to be involved.
That's so true. And there's so many people who were not alive during that time. When we read about the movement, the civil rights movement, or we, see the footage on television, there's this misnomer that everybody who was Black was involved, right? Everybody was marching with a picket sign. And that's not true. Everybody didn't get involved because it was very dangerous,
right,
to be involved in that kind of thing. And sometimes the class differences, sometimes that made a difference in why you would or would not be involved. And so it just wasn't a given. And I think about people today who always say, oh, if I had lived during that time,
right,
I would have been right there with Dr. King. I would have been up there. I would have been taking all the risks. And I keep thinking, you probably would have done back then whatever it is you're doing right now.
right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
If you're not active now and you're not putting it all on the line now, you probably wouldn't have done so then, is what I think, for most folks. And that goes for you, I may not have the courage to be out there and to have risked it all.
Right, because I'm one of those people who has said that if I would have been around then, I would have done X, Y, and Z. Because we know that it takes people who have the courage to do that, and this is something that requires a lot of courage.
It really does.
And we see that in reading this story. So, however, for you to write this book, what was it that inspired you to want to write the book and to focus in on those 2 particular time frames? Because in this case, the whole book is pretty much historical fiction, because these are times that are past.
The 90s, which is so weird to think of the 90s being historical, but it is considered historical. Like, no, that feels like just yesterday when I was in college.
It was.
Right. That's the way it feels. But what really inspired me, going back to the summer of 2020, when George Floyd was murdered, and I saw that there were so many people from every walk of life, different races, ethnicities, just people from all over the world decided they wanted to get involved once they saw this white police officer, kneeling on the neck of George Floyd for more than 9 minutes, snuffing the life out of that man.
Mm-hmm.
People were just outraged and saying, we're not going to put up with this anymore. Now, some of that was, as we saw with some of the companies and all that, was performative. Right. I think now, years later, but I just remember being so struck by people who wanted to be a part of making change in that area. So that was one thing. And then a few months after George Floyd was murdered, Representative John Lewis died. Mm-hmm. And I was watching a documentary about his life. And in that documentary, they talked about him being 19 years old, young student. He also went to Fisk University as well as a theological school too. But he was a young man in college and leading the sit-ins that really helped launch the civil rights movement. And then when I saw that, I was like, I've only thought about Representative John Lewis as this larger than life figure from the movement, right? You think
Right.
about him with, the march and Selma and all that. And it's almost like he was untouchable, almost like a Dr. King, really,
Right.
One of the elders of the civil rights movement. But I was thinking, what would it have been like for him to be 19 and to go through this at a time when you're in college, you're trying to figure out your class schedule, get your syllabus together, study, you're making new friends, you're trying to date, all these things that you go through as a young adult in college. What would that have been like to have gone through that? So that's how I got the idea for the story, this idea of activism. And then what was it like to be young and to be that age? And so that's how the story of Freda, the character in 1959 in the 60s, was born. And then I started thinking, well, I don't want to just focus on that. I want to kind of show the through line of how history continues to repeat itself, and look at another time period. And then I kept thinking, wow, what's a time period that I do know something about? Because I wasn't alive during the 60s. I was born in the 70s. But I was like, I want to look at another time period. And I was a student in college at Northwestern University in 1992. At the time of the acquittal of the 4 officers for the beating of Rodney King. And that was my first taste of activism, was then. So I thought, I can kind of speak to it from my own experience. It's not autobiographical at all. I mean, because I didn't, beyond doing one protest march on the campus of Northwestern, I didn't do any other activism. But it was really my first taste of it. And so I thought, that'll be another good timeline to explore.
Yes, and I love that you chose to do that, because I mean you had to go through a research process and all of that anyway, but having it be a little closer to something that you would have gone through and experienced, that was smart. To do that just to make it a little easier for yourself.
That's so true. Yes.
And then also
you still have to do some research.
Yeah, you still got to do the research though, because you don't know it all. There are going to be things things that you miss along the way. But then also, you talk about Fisk and Nashville, but also including your hometown of Chicago in the book as well. So, if anything is parallel to your life, I guess it would be that part that they are.
That part of it. And I have some family members who attended Fisk as well. And so I did talk with some people who attended Fisk as part of the research. Because you talked about research. So for the first book I wrote, The Kindest Lie, it was contemporary. So I didn't have to do quite as much of the research, but this one being historical, particularly for that 1950s, 60s storyline, I had to do quite a bit of research. And I interviewed some women, I was going to say some young ladies, they're like in their 80s now, these ladies who were students there during that time. And so I love talking with them about that. And it's interesting because we talked about what it was like to be there with all that activism going on. But a lot of the research and the conversations were about the little details that matter so much. Even when you're writing fiction, you have to get the details right. So I was asking them, okay, so when you went to class, what did you wear? So they told me about some of the professors, you had to wear a skirt or a dress. You had to wear your pantyhose in certain professors' classes, right? So those kinds of things, and curfew, having a house mother, what you couldn't do. You couldn't go off and ride in a car with a boy anywhere, right? Those kinds of things. And they would have to sneak and do that kind of stuff.
Right.
So all that I was not privy to, I had to get that through the research, the people I interviewed.
Yes. And one of the people that you interview is the late, great Nikki Giovanni. So I'm sure that was quite an honor to be able to talk to her.
It was such an honor to talk to her. I had done an interview. So we are both with the same publisher. We're both with William Morrow, which is an imprint of HarperCollins. And Nikki Giovanni was also interviewed along with me by the library marketing team for William Morrow. So we had done that together. So I was so nervous then, just being on the virtual stage. It was a virtual interview, being with her, and I was just in awe. And So so that was my first introduction. And then once I knew I was going to write this particular book, this second book, I talked to my editor at the publishing house, and she said, "Oh, well, we were talking about the fact that Nikki had been a student at Fisk University in the 60s. And we know that she was very involved in activism as well. So she was the perfect person to interview." And so they lined it up for me to be able to interview Nikki Giovanni. And so we did a Zoom call. So
Wow.
the way I'm looking at you and talking to you now, I had an hour-long conversation with Nikki Giovanni, and it was just incredible and as spicy and saucy and as she is, as you have seen in the interviews with her, she was that way with me, right? It's like she suffers no fools, and
No.
so I had to be on my toes and all of that. But she was the one who told me about a lot of the hidden history that
Right.
she wrote about in the book. Particularly, some of this may not be as hidden, but for me at least, I didn't know about the role of certain celebrities
Right.
in the movement. That you'll learn about one particular
Yeah.
very well-known star and
Mhm.
what that person's role was in the movement. Also, the Pullman Porters, I didn't know about their role either. But so she told me about all this hidden history, and there were some things that I needed to know about plot-wise in the book, and she helped me to figure that out, how certain things could transpire, like what would be believable and plausible.
Right.
And then when she told me about some of this hidden history, I said, "Oh, well, as soon as we get off the Zoom call, I'm going to go Google this and, do all the look it up." And she said, "Girl, you're not going to find this in the history books."
Well, yeah,
Sorry.
I mean, and that's the thing right there. Just the fact that there's so much that we don't know because
Right.
it's not going to be in the books
It's not in
because,
the books.
history is told from someone else's perspective and not always ours.
That's right. And we
So
know what's happening right now with the
we know what's
whitewashing
happening.
of our history and the little bit that we got when we were in school. They're trying to take it out of the
Right.
history books for the young people who are coming up today. It's really sad. So it just makes me feel like the work I'm doing as an author is more important and
It is.
meaningful than ever, because
It
I
is.
am sharing these stories, sharing our history, and that's so important to do
It
that.
is. It is so important. So let's talk about, we're going to start with the mama, Freda, the late 1959 and the early
60.
1960s.
Yeah.
So she goes away to Fisk University, there were a lot of people who weren't necessarily going to college. So that's a thing in and of itself. But
Right.
she's going into college with a certain level of privilege because she comes from a family that has gone to Fisk. She has a father who's a physician. That's not giving anything away.
No, not at all.
But so it's interesting to see her coming out of Chicago and landing at Fisk, which is in Nashville, Tennessee, which is considered the South, and just what that experience was like for her.
Yes, it was a rude awakening. I think in the beginning, the first few weeks, she's just like, "Oh, la di da," you know what I mean? Like it's a great experience. She's heard so much about Fisk from her parents, and neighboring Meharry, which is right across, the way from Fisk. That's Meharry Medical College. So she knows about this world from her parents. But she grew up in Chicago, where she really wasn't exposed to a lot of overt racism. Right. But there are some scenes in the book where she thinks back and remembers that, oh, yeah, there was some racism, some things that she watched her mother endure and that kind of thing. But it was a lot more subtle in Chicago, in the North. But when she gets there, I mean, she thinks of Nashville, though, even though it is the South, she thinks this is a lot more sophisticated and genteel, even though she knows the Jim Crow South. These kinds of things don't happen here. And in some ways, when you're on the campus of a university like that, and you're with all these people just like you, there are a lot of people of privilege who are able to, be able to go to a university, a top-notch university like Fisk. And in some ways, you're insulated from the rest of the world, and so the other world, it doesn't really encroach upon her until a few weeks in, when she goes on a date with a young man named Darius, who's a saxophone player, and she goes on this date with him to the state fair. And when she gets there to the state fair, that's where she first discovers some of those overt parts of the indignities of the Jim Crow South, because she sees white and colored restrooms for the first time. And that experience was something that I actually read about. So I told you I interviewed people for the book, but I also thought about Diane Nash, who was
Yes, Diane Nash.
very
We
well
cannot
known
forget her.
civil rights activist who was a student at Fisk. And she had a similar experience to that when she was a young student at Fisk, of going to the fair and seeing, the white and colored signs, and it really hitting her for the very first time. And so that's what happens with Freda. And so she then finally sees that, oh my gosh, the Jim Crow South is something that, I heard about, read about, but she didn't know what it would really be like to live in that. And so it really throws her. It hits her extremely hard. And so she, even though she knows it's wrong, and she, believes that, it shouldn't happen and something should be done about it, she has some very different ideas there in the beginning about activism and what she's starting to see the young people, or some of the young people around her, getting involved in when they're organizing.
Yes, I mean, and that's the thing, because with her coming from Chicago, South Side Chicago, yes, a lot of people may not know that Chicago is very segregated, especially at that time. So even though there were Black people that lived there were certain areas that they lived in and others that
you had Bronzeville, and she was kind of coming up in that area.
Right.
It was a big arts scene, and it was a pretty classy part of the city, and you growing up around other very accomplished Black people, so a very different existence. And then I've got this one part in there where Freda thinks about the white milkman who would come visit, and and that milkman, white guy, had a very cordial relationship with her mother when he would come and deliver milk. And she even had some exchanges, some interactions with him. She's a real whiz at math. And so he'd be counting out the change and all that. And so she's thinking, these white people are okay. What is there to be, concerned about? But then she does the rude awakening.
It's definitely a rude awakening. And then you already touched on it, just talking about the people, and even the book kind of title gives it away a little bit, but we'll get into that in a little, before we finish up what it means to be a people or person of means. But she is in an upper middle class family, so that there's the thing with that as well. So something that someone who might be, not as well off, someone who might have been living in the projects or things like that, their whole life experience is totally different as well. So it's not just about race, it's also about class.
Yeah. In both books, in The Kindest Lie, I dealt with race and class and family. And in People of Means, I'm also dealing with issues of race and class, because Freda, and then of course her daughter Tulip, they are part of the middle class, or the upper middle class, definitely that professional class. And that has a lot to do with how they choose to engage in some of the activism. Because Freda's parents, talking about, these are professional, Black professionals, and they sent her here to continue this legacy at Fisk. And part of continuing that legacy is being excellent, doing well in your studies, not getting sullied by this marching and all of that, right? So that, you know what I mean?
So you said that.
Excited by all that, we don't.
Yes.
That's not what we do, right?
Right.
Because they believe that the uplift of the community was being part of that talented 10th that W.E.B. Du Bois talked about, right? That's how you lift yourself.
You lift yourself up by your bootstraps.
By your bootstraps, exactly. And they had other ways of doing it. And and you read the book, you see that Freda's parents, they were, there was the NAACP, there's the Urban League, there are organizations that are there to make sure that, they're supporting and lifting the community. And that's how you go through the proper channels.
Right. Proper was the key word, because the whole thing of what's respectable to do versus what's not.
And risk the whole idea of respectability politics. I'm trying to also explore that too, what some of the problems are with that whole mindset too. It's like, it's one of these things where I don't want to judge the characters, but I just want people to understand them, where they're coming from, right? and see a different type of Black person than you may have thought about when you think about, civil rights movement.
Right, because a lot of times we might think of the Montgomery bus boycott, for example, where everybody, they were laborers who didn't get on the bus so they can go to and from work. Where in these people, like Freda and her family, would have had cars, they wouldn't have been getting on anybody's bus.
Right. Exactly. And then the train travel, that was another rude awakening for Freda to be able to see, once the train goes to, crosses that Mason-Dixon line, and you get, when you go from the north to the south, the segregated train cars and such, that's also part of it.
Mm-hmm. So, we've already mentioned that she gets this rude awakening on this date with Darius. Now, in the book, I like the way it's in different sections, but within those sections, so you're like kind of going back. Well, they're both, older timelines. So you're like, it's Freda's timeline and then it's her daughter's timeline. But then within those separate timelines, you also have the young men that are in their lives tell their parts of the story as well. So from just the perspective of writing it, was it a challenge to give everybody, all these different people, points of view?
Voice and points of view. Right. It was something that I thought about from my first book, The Kindest Lie, because I originally in that book did 4 point of view characters. Okay. And then when I started shopping the book around with agents and editors, they were telling me that it was just too disparate. It was too, I needed to focus on 2 characters, my 2 main characters, and that's what I did. So then in this book, I was worried about making that mistake, but I thought in this book, I really wanted to hear those other voices. Right. Now, you could have gotten their perspectives through Freda and Tulip, the mother and the daughter, but I thought these young men, how they're engaging in activism is just such a pivotal part of the telling of this story. That I want you to hear their perspectives, their points of view, and see how that compares and contrasts with the women in their lives. And also because I decided I wanted to have, there's a love triangle.
There is.
Yes, with Freda's story, there's a love triangle. And so she's caught between 2 different young men with different ideas about the world and how to be in the world. And I think that love story and that love triangle comes alive a lot more when you get the perspectives of Darius, the saxophone player, and then this other young man, Gerald, who's a student at Meharry Medical College. And then in Tulip's story, she has a love interest named Key. He's a bus driver, and she's a public relations professional, college graduate. So again, playing with the idea of class differences there as well, and how that manifests itself, and not in the ways that you may not be in the way you would expect in terms of how each of them think about activism, right?
It's true. That's true, because there are definitely a lot of things in this book that surprised me. I told you about one of them before we came on. You all have to read. We're not going to talk about it, but but it's just. It's good to see that and understand that, just because it's a man, he's not going to think a certain way just because he's a man, or a woman's not going to think a specific way just because she's a woman. So we do see that because, as you mentioned, both the mother and daughter are coming of age in different times. And so we are watching them navigate what it even means to be a woman, a young woman, and figuring out who she is and what she wants. We see that, we're still with Freda, and you mentioned Gerald, she meets him, and he is this a man who pretty much is just like her father.
Right. That's right.
And so it's like,
and it's the kind of man her parents want her to be with and to marry.
Kind of man her parents want her to be with. So there is this thing of deciding, okay, am I going to be with the person that maybe might not have all of the, all of the T's crossed and the I's dotted in the way that my family would want it to be? Or am I going to follow in the path that they would want from me and not necessarily follow my heart, but follow what I think is right for me?
That's so true. That's a big part of the book. Will I follow my heart? Will these characters follow their hearts and do what their passion and their purpose is in life? Right. or will the weight of familial and societal expectations influence what they choose to do and weigh? That's a big weight on them.
It's a big weight. It's
It
a
is.
big weight. It's a very big weight. But, I'm thinking because, my mother would have been, well, she was 62 to 66 that she would have been at college at Savannah State. So some of that is overlap. And, I know back then it was like, you go to college. Yeah, you're going to college, but you're going because you want to find a husband.
Right.
You're
and
not
after the book, after one
book.
of those calls home, because back then you couldn't call, your parents every day, right? It was like, I think Sunday afternoon or evening was,
Yes.
The best time, rates were lower and all that. And in one of those conversations Freda has with her mother, before they hang up, she tells her, make sure you find your husband there the way I did, the way, I got my husband. Make sure you do the same thing. And they have someone in particular in mind, right, for her.
So yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing of really deciding, what kind of woman am I going to be? And we see that. But because this story is taking place in Nashville, and we know that there was a lot going on in terms of the movement, the sit-ins and, all different types of things that were happening, being able to see Freda in this space, and not just her, she has some, girlfriends and, all the different people around them, how everybody is dealing with, how are we going to manage, or are we going to manage being a part of this thing that's ultimately going to benefit us all ultimately, but are we going to play an active role in it, or are we just going to kind of step back because maybe we're afraid of what the outcome may be?
And that's one reason why I introduced Freda's friends, because it widens her world, and it shows a lot of, not just Freda's just one person, one experience, but her friends, you get to see what their experiences were like. And one of her friends, Cora, has some other things that are weighing on her in terms of whether or not to get involved in activism, and some things with her life and her family's life and their livelihood that's at risk, and that was one of the things that I got from interviewing some of these women who were students at the time. I interviewed one woman who was from Tennessee, and she said, I was a student there, and she said, I had to be careful. I couldn't get involved in all this stuff because she said my parents were teachers, and they could lose their jobs, if I got involved with that. If any word ever got back to their employer, in the small town we lived in, that my parents' livelihood would be at risk. Right. And so that also means my education as well could be at risk, because they're the ones sending me to Fisk University. And so that was something I explore in the book too.
Yes. And of course, we know not just, whether or not they continue at school or be able to keep their jobs, will they be alive? I mean,
right. That's the ultimate, right?
That's
you get
the ultimate.
In this kind of thing is that, what the risks are of doing that. It's really dangerous type thing. It's not a play thing. And there is a scene in the book where, I won't get into it too much, but there is a scene where Freda and some of her friends and dorm mates, go and watch the nonviolent action. What do you call it? Like trainings, trainings, and how to resist. When they start beating you over the head, or they're pushing you, or they're throwing hot water on you. How do you respond to that kind of provocation? And that's something that they really start to that she really starts to think about. The fact that this is dangerous business. In a way, when she watches it, it almost feels like play acting to Freda, but it's not, right?
It's not.
And soon she does get to see that this is real.
Right.
Yeah, they are doing role playing to prepare these young activists for how to respond to threats and acts of violence. But it's real. It's a real thing.
Yes, and if you've watched any of those, films from that time frame, you've seen some of that play out. And like when I went to the Smithsonian, the African American the Blacksonian, we like to call it, in DC. They even have like a setup of the counter and different things like that, so you can kind of.
The American Museum in DC. I went there over the summer, and I got to sit at their simulation of one of those lunch counters, and I was like, wow, this is taking me right there. I think theirs was a simulation from the Greensboro, North Carolina sit-ins with the students who were students at that time who were sitting in at the lunch counters.
So it's a real thing, and it really wasn't that long ago, because as I said, my own mother would have been in college in that time frame. So a lot of times I think that's the other thing that this book kind of brings it more to someone's forefront to think, oh, that could have been my mama, that could have been my grandmama, who's still alive and kicking.
Still alive, right? Yeah, my mother would tell me stories. My parents, they would go to segregated movie theaters and all that. So, and I would sometimes get on my mom and say, did you ever say, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to sit there? She said, no, I didn't do that. I didn't want to create a problem, right? And that's just kind of the way it had to be, right? But I think those of us now, because of the privileges that we have, we can't imagine somebody telling us, you got to sit in the balcony of that theater, or you can't sit here at this lunch counter and order a sandwich. You got to get your food and take it out back, go outside to eat it, not eating it in here. So we can't imagine putting up with that, right? So that's why I was asking my mom, like, why would you even put up with something like that, right? And I was really judging her, and I shouldn't have been, but viewing it through my lens of today, right? And not really understanding what she had to go through. It's like, you do what you have to do to survive the day.
Yeah, do what you have to do to survive. Yeah. But yes, I know we spent a lot of time talking about Freda, but we need to talk about Tulip, because she's coming, she's a 90s girl in a 90s world. That was a song. But yeah, she's growing up in the 90s, and she looks, she is facing what you initially became involved in activism with what happened with Rodney King, and not just him, Latasha Harlins as well.
Yeah.
What happened out there in LA, and the fact that in the case of Rodney King, that those officers were acquitted, even though we watched them beat him and all of these sorts of things, and then what happened after the fact. So.
So when I'm telling Tulip's story, I'm thinking about, Rodney King, and the reason that so many people, as I was saying earlier, around the world were protesting that is because of the video, from cell phone video, which is very crisp, very clear, right? And everybody around the world watched that. We sat there just stunned for that 9-minute period and watch that happen. Like, we can't believe we're seeing this with our own eyes. And the Rodney King case was the first time, or at least one of the first times of really having video. Didn't have cell phone video, but it was camcorder video. So it was a lot more grainy, but still you could see what was happening and how those officers were beating Rodney King. And that's why when that verdict came in of not guilty, how could that be when you watched the very same thing that everybody else watched? How could this jury have come to that conclusion? And that's what gets Tulip enraged, right? She's like, this is just not right. And she wants to do something about it. But then you look at the generational differences. It's kind of interesting, because I don't want to give away what conclusions Freda comes to, but the way Freda handles it with Tulip is very much akin to the way her parents handled some of the things when she was kind of flirting with the idea of activism when she would talk with them. You know what I mean? They made sure to tell her, you stay out of that, stay away from that, do not get involved. And so you see some of that same kind of thing play out with Freda when she's talking to and counseling her daughter, who's in her mid-20s on her first job out of college. So
and that's even that in and of itself, the fact that she's not a student. We don't capture Tulip as a student, but she's in her first career, her first
Right.
job, her first real job. And, she is moving up, and, there's some
Yeah.
ways that she got the job that you have to read the book
You have
to
to read
find.
about. But I wanted to do that with. I thought about having Tulip be a college student, like I was a college student when I,
Mm-hmm.
participated. But for me, as a student participating in a march about Rodney King, there wasn't a whole lot of risk involved.
Right.
And I mean, I don't think my parents told me not to or anything. I mean, I just think it was something that, all kinds of students were doing it. And a college campus, is
Right.
such a bastion of, progressivism in some ways,
Right.
when you're in college.
Right.
And so it was not the same level of risk and sacrifice that Tulip has to face on her first job, right?
Right.
That's your livelihood. That's, she's got to make a living. And she has a lot to live up to, because of her parents, who they are, all of that. There's so much that weighs on her too. So I'm always talking about this weight of the expectations of family and of society.
Right. And there definitely were the expectations, because, of course, she, again, comes from this family that's doing really well. She's got this job. She's, she's looking to move up. She's in marketing and PR. She's looking to move up, looking to take on new clients, get promoted, all these different things.
Yeah.
But then she's hit by this situation that happened with Rodney King, and has to make a decision, like, am I going to get involved in this? Am I not going to get involved with this? How far is my involvement?
How far will I go? And then that also, it's not an exact parallel, but I did draw, in terms of the emotions of what she's dealing with, I did draw upon the experiences that I've had as a professional here in recent years, in 2019, 2020, because I was the co-chair of our diversity, equity, and inclusion internal work at the organization where I work. Wow. And so I have a lot of thoughts about that, right? And being the co-chair of that, there were times when I kept thinking, how far do I go? What will the ramifications be on my job in terms of how vocal I can actually be? Because we got started in 2019, but then 2020 happened. And so, of course, so many people in the workplace were talking about that.
Right.
And it was the first, and my co-chair and I helped initiate those conversations, because those kinds of conversations had never happened, at least not in our workplace.
Right.
So this was the first time that people were coming to work, and it's like they were coming to work, particularly Black folks coming to work, trying to do their job, but also thinking about, oh, my husband, my father, my brother, my son, that this could happen to him when he's out there in the streets, right? And they were, afraid for the safety of particularly the Black men in their lives after Rodney King. I mean, not Rodney King, after George Floyd.
Right.
So these were, things that were going on, and I kept thinking about how I was feeling, pushing forward, yet having some trepidation during those moments.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it is something, because, and of course, with Tulip, it wouldn't have been the case because she didn't have to worry about social media. But, like nowadays, it's like, if you want to be on social media and be vocal about different things, you got to be careful about that, depending on where you are. There's all these things that you have to consider.
Yeah, social media wasn't a thing then, but that would have been even bigger.
That would have been even bigger. But Tulip still has to deal with it, because, she is in a workplace where she is one of, less than a handful of Black people. She's she's on the rise. People are looking at her. They know her family, all these sorts of things. So it was definitely, I really was intrigued by the push and pull that she was going through, of just deciding what to do and how to do it, and and the risks that she took. No, it wasn't so much that her life was in danger, like it may have been for her mother in the 60s, but it was a thing of her career, and what does that mean?
Right. So much that was at risk for her. Because these organizations, they're here to do it. You're there to do a job, right? We're here to make money, to make a profit. you handle your your side things, your side interests outside of the workplace, not at work, right?
Right.
And back then, people just weren't. DEI was getting started then in the 90s, but back then it was a lot more about compliance. To
Right.
you know what I mean? Like some of those EEO type
Right.
things, but it wasn't about having real conversations about race, and you weren't talking about anti-racism
Right. Oh,
and
definitely.
white supremacy and all
Yeah.
of that. That was not happening at all in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
So this
But
was
she,
something he was really grappling with.
right. But yeah, she was still dealing. I mean, let's face it, what they call microaggressions or aggressions, that stuff is real. I mean, it's always real in the workplace for, Black women, Black men, people of color, people who are considered othered. It's always an issue because one of the characters in this book was a gay white male. So of course he had different,
He was dealing with his own
dealing with his own stuff. So anytime
Yeah.
you're not considered a part of the privileged class, it's always going to be an issue. And people saying things about her, about why she got the job or how she got the job, and what there might have been a little bit of truth just because of how she got the job. But she still had to be there.
You still have to excel. Otherwise, they're not going to have you there.
They're not going to keep.
And that's the whole idea about Black excellence too. Is another theme, and we've already talked about it in a way. Just didn't label it, I think, as Black excellence. But so many of us grow up with parents who tell us you got to work 10 times harder than your white counterparts to get half as far. And that's something that Tulip is thinking about. She's got to work hard. So nothing has been handed to her really, right? Because she has to be excellent, to stay afloat there. But then there's also that burden of Black excellence too.
Black excellence.
Right. Yeah, because Freda goes through it as well.
Right. And then with Tulip, of course, her boyfriend Key, we're seeing that dynamic as well because, as you mentioned earlier on, he's a bus driver, and she's this professional woman. So there's a lot of tension about her family. She's moving because she loves him as he is, and all of that.
But the family is like, that's not really who we had in mind. Right? Even though Freda, has got these two men that she had to choose between as well. But still, when it comes to her daughter, there are certain expectations of who she's going to be with. And you start thinking about, because every generation, even though you went through some of this stuff where you were out there trying to think about flirting possibly with activism and all that, but you get to a certain point in life where you got bills to pay and you've now got a mortgage and you got all these things. And it's like, okay, now I'm having children. I'm trying to set them up for success. I want this generation to do better than I did. Right. And so they're thinking about all those things and they want her to make the kinds of choices that are going to be wise choices for her future.
And they are a part of the Black bourgeoisie. I mean, let's
they
call
really
it.
are.
They're going. I mean, I'm in a sorority, so yes, I've been to debutante stuff like that. But they're living that lifestyle, so there's that too because they are oftentimes very concerned with what things look like to other people. And I mean, that plays out in both timelines.
Yes.
That, what are other people going to think if they know that you're doing that? Or, how's it going to impact me? I mean, not just with the jobs and things like that, which we already talked about, but how is society going to look at me?
What are people at the tennis club going to say?
Right.
Yeah. So you have to be very careful, And you see some of that play out with Freda and her husband as well.
Absolutely.
And some of the steps that they are playing, some of these bougie games with,
And but it's something because, and we've already talked about it somewhat, but I just want to expound upon it a little bit. The whole thing of something to lose and something to lose looks different depending on what perspective you're coming at it from.
Oh, something to lose. Tell me more about what you're thinking there.
just the fact that, say, the regular, I'm going to say the regular person who's just going to work every day, and, maybe it's just, they have a job and they're just sustaining their day to day. There
Right.
is a certain something to lose in that instance, because, if you lose your job, you might lose your house, or, all these other things.
Right. Right.
But then if you're this person of a certain society and people are looking at you in a different way, you're something to lose. It could be some of those financial things as well.
Right. But it
It's
could be
also
status too.
that you're
Right.
standing, how people
You're
look
standing, how people look at you, whether or not you have, if you're a person who's got a police record or something, you might have
right.
something to lose as well. Or,
Mhm.
or like we talked about, if you've got, certain kinds of jobs that could be on the line because they find out that you were involved in this. So there are a lot of people, characters who think about, what they have to lose, and that's part of the calculation sometimes in terms of
Mhm.
how involved to be. But then sometimes you've got something to lose and you take the risk anyway.
Right.
Right. And you see
Take the
some of
risk
that
anyway.
too. You see some of the characters who take the risk anyway. So,
Right. And I mean,
yeah.
that is a thing. Because let's face it, for all the people who fought, in the past, the people who are fighting now, for freedom, the people that are going to fight in the future, there's always a risk. There's
Right.
always a risk.
Right. And you have Gerald, just to say a few things about him, he's in medical school in the 60s. And, he's a character that I think could be misunderstood in terms of where he's coming from with how involved or not involved he wants to be. But, he's sacrificed a lot. His, there's a lot that's gotten him to where he is, to be able to go to medical school. It wasn't an easy road for him to even get there to medical school. And so he's focused on getting good grades and graduating and becoming a medical doctor. And there's a part in the book, where he, where he talks about doing for the community, right? Treating people, we see him in the hospital setting too, taking care of Black folks, right? That are brought to the hospital. There's a Hubbard hospital that was affiliated with Meharry, because Black folks couldn't always go to certain hospitals and get medical care, right? So he has his own way of really resisting in some way as well. So, yeah.
So I just really appreciate in this book being able to look at things from a different perspective, because everybody does come into a situation. I mean, let's take it to today. Because even today we see, with the stuff that's happening, everybody is approaching things in different ways. Because, for example, some people might be like, well, just boycott, just do
That's
this.
what I was about to say. The whole idea of, are you going to boycott Target, is like the thing now that I see so many people debating.
Right.
There's the one side that's like, hey, we got to do like they did in the 60s.
Right.
You boycott. And that means, just like you talked about the Montgomery bus boycott.
Right.
They didn't say, well, we're going to ride, certain days, or some people who got to go to certain jobs can ride, but the others are going to not ride. But they're like, it's all or nothing. Everybody stays off the bus, and that lasted like, I think, over a year.
It was like 13 months, something like that.
Days, I thought it was. But and then you have the other contingent that's saying, well, what about the people like the Tabitha, the Browns, and the other Black businesses who are going to be hurt because Target had done so much investment in Black-owned businesses, right? And so there's two different thoughts about how we can organize and resist, and everybody's got a point. You know what I mean? Everybody approaches it differently. So it's just, and I think that's part of the through line, and everything else that's going on that we have to resist, not just Target, but this rollback of DE&I, and we see democracy on the line, and all the ways that we have to regain certain rights. And I was thinking about this the other day, kind of in preparation for my book coming out, thinking about the 1950s, 60s, the 1990s, where we are today, and how history just continues to repeat itself. And I think about what Freda and the people in that time period were fighting for in the civil rights movement. In the 1860s, after the Civil War, you had the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. You had the 14th Amendment, which granted birthright citizenship to all people, including formerly enslaved people. 15th Amendment gave African-American men the right to vote. And you had Black men in the Jim Crow, no, it wasn't Jim Crow South, I'm sorry, we didn't have Jim Crow back then, but Black men in the South were even holding political office back then. But then you think about it, 100 years later, or close to it, Black folks, Freda and them, had to fight to regain the rights that they had already had. That, you know, it's a century later, they got to fight to regain it. And I think about where we are today, we're trying to regain some of the things, the rights and the privileges that we thought we had already struggled and gotten. It doesn't matter that we've had a Black president. We're still fighting many of these same battles again.
Right. And that's why, you know, in reading this book, it was like, you know, just looking at the fact that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And the battle might look a little bit different, but we're still fighting a war. And, you know, yes, this is, you know, the 1950s, 1992. But hey, if Tulip had a child, there's a certain thing that they would have to be dealing with now.
That's true. Everything we're going through right now, her child would have to
deal with. And I shared this quote with you from Coretta Scott King: freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. And that is just true. And I mean, that really shows up in this book. And it's a parallel to what we're dealing with now, just thinking about trying to hold on to our voting rights. And, you know, there are some decisions in here because they are young women, you know, decisions about their bodies. And those sorts of things.
Bodily autonomy and a woman's right to choose. And So all those issues, you know, they were dealing with some of that then, and then we're dealing with it now. And so a lot of women today are coming along at a time where they don't have the same rights that their mothers and grandmothers had when it comes to bodily autonomy.
Right. So we gotta keep it going. But this book here, you might not have seen this earlier, but I just wanted to share this. Rosie Lee said, "Love that Mahari and Hubbard Hospital." Yes. Definitely love to see that Black medical history and just some hearts here. But the book, of course, as I mentioned earlier, on People of Means is actually on the shelves in less than 9 hours, 3 hours rather.
So order it now, please. I mean, the first week of sales are so pivotal for authors. So if you plan to read it, please order it now. Please get it now. This first week makes a difference. So I appreciate it. And I'm so anxious to get out on the road and to be meeting readers and all that. It's going to be fun. And this conversation was just the perfect one to kick things off.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I put there the Brown Girl Collective Bookstore, which is affiliated with Bookshop. So if you go there and you go to that page, one of the first things you're going to see is People of Means. So go there and look for that.
We love Bookshop because we love supporting our independent bookstores.
Yes. And in this case,
the lifeblood of the industry.
Yes, it's supporting BGC Book Club. And
that's fine. That's fine. But I'm just saying, Bookshop itself, it also.
Yes, it definitely does that. And that's just so important that we get those books and things.
And we want to support you, Brown Girl Collective, for sure.
Thank you. Oh, someone say, oh, yes, you can definitely catch the replay because this is a really good conversation.
Yeah, I need the link so I can share this far and wide. So.
Oh, yeah. I'll make sure you've got that. But one thing I do want to mention, of course, the physical book, you know, we can get it tomorrow, ebooks and all of that will be available. But you also have an audio that's real special about your audio.
Yes. I don't know if you all have heard the name Bonnie Turpin. Bonnie Turpin is a renowned, very well-known audio narrator. I was so fortunate that she agreed to narrate People of Means. And so I had a great narrator for The Kindest Lie, first book, Shayna Small. But what was really nice with Bonnie Turpin was, as she was going through the process of recording. Oh yeah, so Margaret's saying Bonnie Turpin, goddess.
Yes.
Yes, a total goddess. And so as she was doing the narration, she kept sending me little notes on Instagram to say, oh my God, I've got so many personal connections to the book. And yes, Rosie, Bonnie Turpin is awesome. So Bonnie's mother and I believe mother and father went to Fisk University. And or at least her mother did. Her father went to Meharry, graduated from Meharry Medical College. So these institutions I talk about in the book, her sister is a graduate of Fisk. And then she sends me another note. Oh my God. She said, I don't think we've talked about this yet, but the Pullman Porters, I did say they are part of the book. Her grandfather was a Pullman Porter. So she was just like, you know, everything in here. She had family members who were in the Links. I mentioned an event from the Links.
Yes, sure do.
And so, you know, she says so many touch points that she had with this book. And she told me that as she was recording it, she got emotional. She said, I left more emotion in my read than I normally do when I do a book. And so she said, I'm wondering and hoping that they leave that in because Harper Audio, you know, does the directing of it and the editing of it. And so she said, I hope they leave that in. And so she's also doing a video about some of her connections to the book. And so as soon as I get that, I'll share that in social media as well.
Please do.
So it's such an honor that she did it and then that she has that personal connection. I think that's going to influence the way she narrates it. So please get the audio version as well. Libro FM is a good place to get audio books. So
yeah, that's really good. And, you know, even though I don't have a personal connection, this book was just good to me because I can relate to the things that were going on. And it gave me so much food for thought just to think about, you know, what does it mean to be a revolutionary?
Right.
And there are a lot of different ways we can, you know, be a revolutionary.
You can do it. That's true. There's not one way.
There is not one way.
You can do
not one way.
No.
So,
and so then that also helps us think about our own capacity to do so. And that's part of what I think about with calling this book People of Means. You know, part of it is about an upper middle class family. And so there's that socioeconomic piece when we talk about people of means, but it's also about our own, each one of us, our capacity to be able to make change in large and small ways in our own sphere of influence in the way that we are called to do it. And in those ways, we also can be people of means.
I love that. Yes. And thank you, because I was going to get there.
I got there.
Yes. And then there is a scene in the book where someone maybe isn't, you know, quote unquote rich, but there's more than one way to be wealthy. There's more than one way.
Yes.
There's more than one way, you know.
Yep. And I use the term people of means in the book too. And I kind of define it there with one of those people who does not come from money.
Because I mean, there's community, there's family, there's so many other ways that you can be.
So many ways to be a person of means, you know, even outside of activism.
Right.
Yeah.
Just in general, just in life, there are so many ways to be a person of means. I feel like a person of means because of all of you.
Yes, we are people of means for sure.
Yes. So you mentioned that you, of course, the book comes out tomorrow and you are going to be going on tour and doing a bunch of great things. You mentioned you got to go pick up a cake and all that stuff. I know tomorrow you are meeting with someone who was here at the beginning of this year, one of my new friends, and that is Dawn Turner.
Yes, she's a former Chicago Tribune journalist and also author of memoir, Three Girls from Bronzeville. And she is fabulous. Yes. And so I'm going to be in conversation with her tomorrow night in Chicago at Semicolon Books, which is a Black woman-owned bookstore. So I'm really excited about that. And then I'm going to be the next night at Bookends and Beginnings in Evanston, Illinois, with an author friend, Sonali Dev, who has a book out. And so I'm excited to do that. And then at the end of the week, well, actually going into the new week, Sunday, I'll be in Tampa Bay at
Okay.
Oxford Exchange Bookstore with New York Times bestselling author Sarah Pinner. And
Okay.
so we'll be talking there. So I'm excited. I've got things lined up. I've got some more events. Check my website to get a full listing of my events. So that'll be exciting to do that.
And it's listed at the bottom. Those of you who watch all the time, you know it's at the bottom. The social
NancyJohnson.net. You'll get my schedule. I got to make one change to it. I don't know if you know Janice Harper, Spines and Vines.
I do.
Yeah, we're supposed to do it next Wednesday, but she couldn't do that date, so we're going to do next Thursday. So I need to make that update on my website, but I'll be doing an Instagram live with her. So I'm excited about that. Going to the Tucson Festival of Books coming up. And yeah, so I've got a lot of really fun, exciting things. Going to Minneapolis for Literature Lovers Night Out. So yeah, just so many exciting things coming up.
That sounds good. Rosie Lee is actually an author, my author friend who lives here in Atlanta. So
oh, nice.
I'll be writing all that stuff down because she has a
Love
book.
It. What's her book?
Her book is, well, the first one is The Gardens of Eden. That was out last year. And A Garden Wedding is coming out in May. So
okay. So everybody check those books out.
Yes, that's my friend. I always got to
give
her a shout out.
Yeah, we really do have to support each other and lift each other
absolutely. Up. Absolutely have to do that. So I'm excited about all the things that you've got going on, Nancy, and excited about People of Means, this beautiful book. I know that people are going to love it when they get a chance to read it and get into it. So please be on the lookout for her, for Nancy, and all the places that she's going to be. Grab a copy of the book, share this video out with others. So
share with your book clubs too. And I'm happy to Zoom in the book clubs if it's not a local one here in Chicago.
Yes, sounds good. So, and Rosie's saying, your tour sounds amazing.
Thank you, Rosie. Gotta check out your books too.
Yes, please do. That's my friend. Please check out my friend's book.
All right.
But she's a great author. I'm not just saying that because she's my friend.
Right.
But I'm going to let you grab some water. I'm just going to do a really quick announcement with everyone to let them know who's going to be here next week.
Wonderful.
And you don't hang up. I'll see you in just a second, Nancy.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Yes, that was a great conversation. I have been waiting to talk to Nancy for a while. I did not get a chance to talk to her with her first book, The Kindest Lie, but we are going to make up for that as we move forward and make sure that we get her here for all of the other wonderful works that she has out there. But as you go to look for, her books and you want to look at all the things that she's written, please pick up a copy of The Kindest Lie as well. And I have to share this comment. My dad worked at Meharry Hospital morgue, working his way through college at Tennessee State. Oh, okay. All three within walking distance of one another. I'll have to grab a copy from memory, say yes. And that's my other friend that we've known each other since elementary school. So yes, she has that Nashville connection. Thank you. But yeah, it is a good way to connect our histories and just learn something about that time, learn something about all of the times, and be inspired to think about what we need to do in the here and now. So thank you so much for this, Nancy. I appreciate you. Just as a point of quick announcement, next week I'm going to have Double Trouble back again. Actually, they call themselves the twins. That is Suzette Harrison and Suzette Riddick, who wrote it's a series, I want to say either 6 to 8 books that they are writing, novellas that they are writing together. I had them here for the first 2, and they will be back for number 3 and 4 on next Monday. That is the Generations series of novellas, and basically one is a historical fiction, and then one is a contemporary, but they are intertwined. So please, if you go and check out on the Brown Girl Collective YouTube channel, you can see that original conversation, and then get ready for part 3 and 4 of the Generation series next week. So that's all I have for now, and I look forward to seeing you all again next week and beyond. And you all just take really good care of yourselves, and we'll see you real soon. All right, have a good night. Bye-bye.